She was powerful, wealthy, and lost on a back road with a broken-down car. He was a single dad, with grease on his hands, and a ring still on his finger. When she looked into his eyes, she saw more than a man who helped her fix her car. She saw a mystery, a past he wasn't ready to let go. But what she didn't know was how deeply her future would be tied to his quiet strength. This isn't just a love story. It's a story about healing, about second chances, about how one simple act of kindness can change everything. Before we begin, if heartfelt stories about redemption, family, and the quiet miracles of everyday life speak to you, we'd be honored to have you join our growing family. Here at Soul Moments. Story, hit subscribe, and let's take this journey together. The rain hadn't let up for hours. It came down in slow, determined sheets, the kind that didn't just fall, but soaked quietly and thoroughly. Juliana Royce squinted through the windshield of her black Mercedes S-Class, the wipers struggling to keep up. Every streetlight turned into a blurry halo. She had taken a wrong turn 10 minutes ago, and now her GPS was spinning in circles. Lost somewhere in a part of Chicago she hadn't set foot in since she was a child. She tapped the screen. Nothing. Then the dashboard lights blinked once, then again. And then everything went black. The engine gave a sickening jolt. Her car rolled to a slow stop beside a curb lined with overflowing gutters. She sat there for a moment, stunned. The car, her car, the one that could practically drive itself, had failed her. Of course, she muttered, slamming her hand on the steering wheel. Outside, the rain pounded steadily, soaking the sidewalks and bouncing off rusted trash bins. People didn't walk in this weather, not unless they had nowhere else to be. Juliana reached into the back seat for her trench coat and stepped out into the wetness. Her high heels clacked against the pavement, then slipped slightly on a slick spot. She grabbed the car door for balance, sighed, and trudged forward. A dim light in the distance flickered weakly above a narrow garage. Maisha's Auto Repair. The sign read, half lit and unassuming. She could have passed it without noticing, if not for the tiny bell that chimed as she pushed the door open. The warmth inside hit her like a quiet embrace. It smelled of motor oil, damp wood, and something faintly sweet, like cinnamon and old coffee. The shop was neat, though clearly lived, and tools hung on the walls, with a kind of reverence, and a dusty radio whispered jazz in the background. At the far end, hunched over the open hood of a rusty pickup, stood a man, flannel shirt, rolled sleeves, oil-stained jeans. His face was turned away, but his posture spoke of quiet focus. "Excuse me," she called. He looked up slowly, his face illuminated by the hanging light. His features were weathered, but strong. A few days' worth of stubble framed his chin. His eyes steel. Gray. Calm met hers without surprise. "You're soaked," he said, his voice deep steady. "My car died. 2 blocks over," she replied. "Mercedes. I think it's the battery. Or maybe—" She stopped suddenly, conscious of how ridiculous she sounded, dripping in designer clothes and clutching her leather bag like a lifeline. He didn't ask questions, just nodded, grabbed a faded jacket from a hook, and walked past her into the rain. "No, wait, you don't have to." But he was already outside, pulling the hood of his jacket over his head. 15 minutes later, she stood beside him on the street, holding a borrowed umbrella that barely shielded either of them. The man he hadn't given his name worked with quiet efficiency. His hands were precise, confident. She watched as he checked cables, wiped down terminals, and tapped at the starter, with a tool that looked older than her car. "You live nearby?" he asked, not looking up. Not really. He didn't pry batteries corroded. "Starter's hanging on by a thread," he said. After a moment, she hesitated. "Can it be fixed?" He gave a slight shrug. "It'll run, but if it doesn't tomorrow, don't be surprised." He reached into his bag, and pulled out jumper cables connecting them without fuss. Moments later, the car whined back to life. Juliana almost sighed in relief. "Thank you," she said. "Really, I can pay. No charge." Woody closed the hood, rain dripping from the brim of his jacket. Didn't take long. She reached for her wallet anyway, fumbling through her drenched bag. "You don't have to," he said gently but firmly. "Just keep jumper cables next time." There was no arrogance in his voice, no expectation, just something solid, unmovable. And then she saw it as he pushed back his sleeve to wipe rain from his brow. Her eyes caught the flash of a silver ring, plain scratched and worn down, a wedding band. Something in her chest flickered. She wasn't sure what it was. Disappointment. Intrigue. She told herself it didn't matter. He was just a mechanic. She had no reason to care. But she did, for reasons she couldn't quite name. His ring wasn't shiny. It wasn't new. It looked like it had been through years of rain, sun, and grief. It looked held onto. She looked at his face again, still calm, unreadable. But behind that composure, she saw something else. A man who'd once loved deeply, and perhaps lost just as deeply. "I appreciate it," she said quietly. He nodded. "Once drive safe." She hesitated, then opened the car door. As she settled into the driver's seat and turned the heat on full, she looked once more in the rearview mirror. He was already walking back toward the garage, shoulders squared against the wind, his figure vanishing into the mist. The light above the shop flickered once, and then he was gone. Juliana Royce didn't believe in coincidences, at least not the kind that showed up on rainy nights with steel gray eyes and a silver wedding band. She tried to forget about him. She really did. By the time she pulled into the underground garage of her lakefront penthouse, the heater blasting and her soaked coat thrown into the passenger seat, her mind was already working overtime. There was no rational reason she should be so affected by a mechanic who barely spoke 10 words, and yet his presence lingered like the scent of oil on her coat, quiet, stubborn, and impossible to ignore. The next morning, she opened her laptop to a dozen urgent emails, proposals, contracts, a board vote that needed her signature. Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "You have that lunch with the city planner at 1. The donation gala is tonight." And the architect from the Madison project called twice. Juliana stared at the screen. Then, without thinking, she closed her laptop. "Reschedule everything," she said softly. A pause. "Everything, yes. Tell them I'm following up on a personal lead." Micah's garage looked no different in the daylight. The sign still flickered. The sidewalk still held puddles like tiny mirrors. A boy about 12 sat on an overturned milk crate near the door, tinkering with a broken radio. He looked up as Juliana approached. "You lost?" he asked, squinting up at her. "Not today," she said, smiling. "You're the lady from the rain," he added, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Dad said you'd be too rich to come back." She raised an eyebrow. "Did he now?" The boy shrugged. "He says stuff like that. Don't take it personal. I'm Caleb. Nice to meet you. Caleb, is your dad around?" The boy pointed inside, fixing an old Dodge. "You want me to lie and say you're the tax lady?" She laughed, an unexpected sound that caught her by surprise. "No, just tell him. Someone brought coffee." Inside the garage smelled of gasoline and nostalgia. Micah stood under a lifted hood. Sleeves rolled again, focused. He didn't look up when she stepped in, but she noticed the slight pause in his movement, like he knew it was her before she spoke. "Morning," she said. "You came back. I brought coffee. Black, no sugar, I guessed." He wiped his hands on a rag, took the cup and nodded. "You guessed right." Silence fell. Not uncomfortable, but curious. He took a sip, then finally met her gaze. "You don't seem like someone who makes small talk." He said, "I don't. So why are you here?" Juliana paused. This was where she should have offered some polished excuse, a foundation partnership, a business inquiry. But the truth slipped out before she could stop it. "I saw your ring." Micah blinked once, not startled, just still. And he asked, "I don't know." She admitted. Something about it, it felt like something that wasn't finished. Micah looked away into the dim corners of the garage. "It's not. But not everything has to be." She didn't answer. Instead, she glanced around at the space. There were framed photos on the workbench, one of a woman with soft eyes and a crooked smile standing beside Micah and a much younger Caleb. Next to it, a drawing in crayon, a car with wings. "Your wife?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Sarah Cancer took her 8 years ago. I'm sorry." "She used to draw angels in Caleb's lunchbox," he said with a half smile. He started putting wings on everything. Juliana's voice caught. "I used to do that too. When I was a kid. Only, I drew cages." Micah looked at her. Really looked. She cleared her throat. "Sorry, that was probably too much." He set the coffee down. "Not too much, just unexpected." Juliana exhaled, feeling something inside her shift. Maybe it was the way he didn't rush her, or the way he didn't apologize for his pain. She reached for her bag. "I won't keep you. Just thanks again for the help and the quiet." Micah nodded any time. She walked out slowly. As she reached the sidewalk, Caleb called after her. "Hey." She turned. "You coming to the block party Friday night? My dad always grills stuff. Not fancy, but good." Juliana hesitated. "I don't usually go to block parties." The boy grinned. "Then it's about time you did." She smiled, but didn't promise anything. Yet as she walked away, something warm settled into her chest. Not quite hope. Not yet. But maybe. The first crack in a long, cold shell. By Thursday evening, the rain had turned to soft sunlight, and the sky over Chicago carried a faint blush of gold. Juliana Royce stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her lakefront penthouse, cradling a glass of wine, but her thoughts were miles away. 2 neighborhoods over to be exact. She'd told herself that her second visit to Micah's garage had been enough. She had closed that loop, satisfied her curiosity. She had delivered coffee, asked polite questions, and even met his son. That should have been it. But something had shifted. It wasn't just the wedding ring or the solemn man who wore it. It was the silence, the ease, the way time didn't seem to matter in that garage, and how somehow she had said more real things to a stranger in one morning than she had to any boardroom full of executives in years. When Caleb's voice replayed in her mind, "Then it's about time you did." She felt a warmth in her chest that unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Friday came. Juliana stood at her kitchen island, staring at a handwritten invitation to an exclusive donor gala. Her assistant had arranged everything. The dress, the car, even a curated seating chart designed to maximize philanthropic impact. The kind of night where wine flowed like water and conversation was just clever fencing behind champagne flutes. She picked up the invitation, then set it back down. She reached for her keys instead. The block party was already buzzing when she arrived. Strings of warm lights were strung between lampposts, casting a golden hue over the modest row houses. Children ran barefoot, chalking the sidewalks. A jazz band played from someone's porch. The air smelled of grilled meat, buttered corn, and something sweet, maybe peach cobbler. She parked her sleek Mercedes a few blocks away, not wanting to draw attention, though she knew it was inevitable. Still no one stared. They greeted her like a neighbor. Smiled, waved. Caleb spotted her first. "You came." He jogged over his shirt smeared with barbecue sauce and pride. "Dad's by the grill. He's gonna act cool, but trust me, he's glad you're here." Micah stood behind a borrowed grill, flipping burgers and turning skewers with one hand, beer in the other. He wore the same flannel shirt sleeves, rolled hair pushed back in that half-careless way. He looked up as she approached, and for a moment something unreadable passed through his expression. Then he nodded. "Wasn't sure you'd show, I wasn't either," Juliana said. "But the gala had too many forks." He smirked. "We only use one around here." They stood side by side, watching the food sizzle. "You don't seem like someone who goes to many block parties," he said after a while. "I don't," she admitted. "Last time I attended one, I was 10. It was in Maine. My father grilled hot dogs and pretended he wasn't allergic to grass." Micah chuckled. "Sounds brave." He sneezed for a week. A quiet smile settled between them, the kind built not from jokes, but from shared presence. Later, they found themselves sitting on the front steps of the garage, two mismatched paper plates balanced on their knees. Caleb darted by, then reappeared with 2 root beers in glass bottles. "He only buys the real stuff for special guests," Micah said. "I'm honored," Juliana replied, clinking bottles with him. They sat in a comfortable quiet, watching the block dance and shimmer around them like something out of a simpler decade. A boy strummed a guitar on a porch swing. An old couple slow danced on the sidewalk. Laughter floated on the air like music. "You built something here," she finally said. "Not just a garage, a community." Micah took a slow sip. "I didn't plan to, after Sarah passed. I just needed to stay moving. Fixing things, helping people. Guess it turned into something. She must have been special. She kept me grounded, kept me honest. When the chemo failed, I promised her I'd raise Caleb with more heart than money." Juliana looked down at her hands. "Sometimes I think I've done the opposite." Micah didn't answer. He didn't need to. They sat in silence until a gust of wind scattered napkins across the lawn. Juliana chased one down with a laugh, and when she turned, she saw Micah watching her. Not with hunger or judgment or even curiosity. Just presence. Like he saw her. Not the title. Not the company. Not the money. Just her. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. "Come by the shop tomorrow," he said almost casually. "Caleb's building, something he wants to show you. I might—" "You will," she smiled, not because he assumed, but because she wanted to prove him right. As she walked back toward her car, Juliana passed, a little girl twirling barefoot on the sidewalk. The child stopped, looked up at her, and said, "You smell like peaches." Juliana laughed. "I think it's your cobbler talking." The girl grinned and skipped away. Juliana paused before opening her car door. She looked back at the lights, the laughter, the people who didn't need to know her net worth to welcome her in. It had been years since she felt that kind of belonging, and she wasn't ready to let it go just yet. The garage was quiet the next morning. When Juliana arrived, the hum of the city still sleepy in the distance. A cool breeze stirred the air, and sunlight spilled across the pavement like honey. She brought with her a box of pastries from a little French bakery in the North Loop and a cup of Micah's favorite black coffee this time. Without guessing, Caleb opened the door with a wide grin. "Told you you'd come." Juliana handed him the box. "Don't eat them all before your dad gets one." "I make no promises," he said, with a cheeky grin, already lifting the lid. Inside the garage looked the same. Tools perfectly arranged, a radio murmuring Motown, the faint smell of engine oil and morning stillness lingering in the air. Micah stood by a workbench, hunched over what looked like a hand-carved wooden frame. When he looked up, his face shifted from unreadable to something almost like quiet appreciation. "You didn't have to come," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Neither did you that night in the rain," she replied. He nodded slowly and motioned to a folding stool. She sat legs crossed, watching him as he adjusted tiny screws in the frame. "What is that?" "Caleb's science project," he said. "He wanted to build a solar car. We're doing it the old-fashioned way. No kits, just scraps and glue." She smiled. "Sounds like one of my board meetings. All scraps, no glue." Micah chuckled. "Yours probably involve fewer hot glue burns." Their rhythm was easy, simple. Unhurried, Juliana found herself relaxing in ways she didn't even realize she needed. Here, in this humble garage, with its mismatched stools and squeaky tools, she didn't need to be Juliana Royce, CEO. She was just a woman sitting across from a man who somehow made silence feel full instead of empty. But the warmth in the room shifted when her phone buzzed against her coat pocket. She hesitated, then glanced down. Her assistant's name lit up the screen, followed by a message. "Reminder board, meeting starts in 20 minutes. Need final approval on Proposal B." She silenced it, but Micah had noticed. "You always turn off your life like that?" he asked without malice. She looked up. "Excuse me." He gestured toward her phone, then back to her. "Just wondering how often you silence the world to stay where your feet are." There was no accusation in his voice, but something in her chest tightened. "You think I should have taken the call?" Micah shook his head. "Not at all. I think you're still figuring out which world feels more like yours." She stared at him, part of her stunned by the directness, another part relieved. He went back to tightening the frame. Caleb's mom used to say the world doesn't slow down just because you need a moment. You have to choose it. Claim it. Juliana rose from the stool and walked to the open garage door. The breeze outside carried the scent of cut grass and distant lake water. She folded her arms. "I built a life where every answer had to come from me." She said every decision, every direction, even silence had to be scheduled. You can still change that. She turned back to him. "Can you still wear the ring?" The words slipped out before she could catch them. Micah froze. It was the first time she'd mentioned it so directly. The first time she'd dared push against the quiet wall between them. He looked down at his hand. The ring caught the morning light, dull and worn. "I wear it," he said slowly, "because taking it off doesn't mean I stopped loving her. And leaving it on doesn't mean I haven't healed." Juliana stepped closer. "Then why does it feel like a wall?" His eyes met hers, clear, steady. "Because it is, but it's not meant to keep people out. It's meant to remind me who I promised to be." She didn't respond. Her world was full of contracts of terms and signatures and exit clauses. But this quiet vow to a memory, to a kind of integrity she barely understood, felt both foreign and sacred. Before either of them could say more, Caleb burst into the room holding a wooden car painted bright yellow with crooked red wings. "It works," he shouted. "It actually moves in sunlight." Micah broke into a wide grin. "Let's test it out." Outside on the sidewalk, they placed the little car in a patch of direct sun. The moment the rays touched the tiny panel on its roof, the wheels turned with a soft hum, and the car began inching forward, awkward, wobbly, but determined. "It just needs a little push at the start," Caleb said proudly. "But then it goes on its own." Juliana knelt beside the boy, her eyes still on the tiny vehicle. "I know how that feels," she whispered. Micah looked at her, and this time, something in his gaze shifted, not just softened, but opened. It was the look of a man remembering how to let someone in, not replacing the past, but making space beside it. Her phone buzzed again. This time she didn't silence it. She turned it off completely, Micah noticed, and said nothing, but the faint smile on his face said enough. The air was crisp the following evening when Juliana arrived at the neighborhood park. It wasn't grand or landscaped, just a humble patch of green surrounded by benches that had seen better years. But there was something about its quiet sincerity that drew her in. That and the small flyer Caleb had proudly handed her earlier that morning. Neighborhood fundraiser BBQ, all welcome. She hadn't planned on coming. Her calendar had other ideas: strategy calls, donor check-ins, an invitation to a private dinner with the governor. But none of them made her feel like she belonged anywhere. Not the way Caleb's crooked smile and Micah's steady eyes somehow did. She brought pie, not store, bought either. She'd found an old recipe card buried in the back of her late mother's recipe box, pecan pie, with a handwritten note. Use love, not shortcuts. It felt right. When she reached the park, the grill was already going. Kids were tossing frisbees. Someone played an out-of-tune guitar. Micah was in his usual place behind the grill, flipping burgers and laughing at something a neighbor said. Caleb saw her first again and jogged over with sticky hands and a barbecue-stained shirt. "You came, I brought pie. Even better," he shouted, waving her over like she was royalty. "Dad, she made pie." Micah turned. For a moment, he simply looked at her. No surprise, no grin. Just quiet acknowledgement, like seeing someone you hoped would show up and being grateful they did. "Didn't peg you for the baking type," he said as she approached. "I wasn't, but apparently grief and butter go well together." He smiled, not a full one, a private one. She set the pie down at the table, where a row of mismatched dishes sat. Green bean casserole baked beans, cornbread. No labels, no pretense, just food, meant to be shared. They ate on paper plates, sitting in folding chairs beneath a sycamore tree. Caleb buzzed in and out like a honeybee, refilling lemonade, showing off his car project, dragging kids into group games. Juliana watched him with a softness that surprised her. "He's a good kid," she said quietly. "He's the best part of me," Micah replied. Juliana hesitated, then said, "He reminds me of my dad. Not the man he became, but the one I remember. He used to fix broken toasters and give them to families at church. Said, healing doesn't always look like medicine." Micah nodded slowly. "That sounds like something worth remembering." A pause stretched between them, comfortable at first, then heavier. "I looked you up," he said. Finally. She turned. "You Googled me. Actually, Caleb did. Said you looked kinda important. Turns out he was right." She waited for judgment, for awe, for the walls to go back up, but Micah just sipped his lemonade. "You're a billionaire," he said, matter-of-factly. "I am." "You didn't tell me. You didn't ask." He considered that, then said, "Fair enough. I didn't want it to matter." She added, and it didn't. Until now, she looked at him unsure where this was going. "You know," he said, "people think grief turns us into different people, but I think it just reveals the version of us we've been hiding." Juliana stared at her half-empty plate. "And what do you see when you look at me?" Micah didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet. Someone who's tired of pretending strength means being alone. She didn't blink, didn't breathe. The words landed with the weight of something she'd never dared name. Before she could speak, a woman in her 60s approached their table, hair tied up in a scarf, arms loaded with mason jars of sweet tea. "Well, well, Micah. You didn't tell us your guest was famous." Juliana stood politely. "Please don't." But the woman laughed kindly. "Relax, honey. Around here, we measure people by how they show up, not what they show up in." Micah took the jars from her arms. "Thanks. Miss Darlene, As she walked away, Juliana sat back down slowly. "You all act like you've known each other forever," she said. "We have. Or at least we've earned the right to." "And me," Micah looked at her steady. "You keep showing up, that counts more than most things." They sat in silence again, the kind that wasn't awkward anymore. The sun began to dip, casting amber light over the grass and the worn edges of the world. Juliana leaned back in her chair and sighed. "I'm not used to this," she admitted. "To what? Not being in control." Micah looked over. "Neither am I. But sometimes losing control is the only way anything new can grow." She looked at him, then really looked, and something inside her cracked, not shattered, but opened. The first breach in a wall she'd spent years building. Just then, Caleb ran over with 2 plastic cups. "One for each of you," he said, handing them over. "Lemonade, with too much sugar. Just how Dad likes it." Micah raised his cup to the pie. Juliana raised hers to solar cars with wings. Caleb beamed. They clinked cups, and the moment held, not as something magical or cinematic, but as something real. Micah stood to toss their plates. "You know there's a community cleanup tomorrow. Could use another set of hands." Juliana raised an eyebrow. "You planning to work me into every neighborhood chore?" He smirked. "Only the meaningful ones." She smiled. "Then I'll bring gloves." As Micah walked toward the trash bins, she watched him go. For the first time in years, she wasn't calculating the next move, the next win, the next meeting. She was just present, and it felt like breathing again. The next morning was quiet, too quiet for Caleb. He padded into the kitchen, barefoot, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and scowling at the oatmeal in the pot. "We out of bacon," Micah nodded without looking up from the newspaper Moschery run tomorrow. Caleb groaned theatrically, then stopped, Dundolano mid-sigh. "Hey, can I show Miss Juliana the box today?" Micah looked over the top of the paper of the box. "You know," Caleb said, already disappearing down the hallway. "The memory box. From Mom." Micah's hand froze over the page. That box had sat on the top shelf of his closet for years, unopened. Not because he'd forgotten, but because he hadn't yet found the strength to remember. A minute later, Caleb returned balancing a dusty, floral-patterned shoebox in his arms, like it was made of glass. "She deserves to know who Mom was," he said quietly. Micah didn't answer, but something in his eyes softened. He knew Juliana was coming by that afternoon. She had promised again, and for reasons he didn't fully understand, he believed her. Juliana arrived with a paper bag of fresh groceries and a quiet smile. "I brought bacon." Micah lifted an eyebrow. "That'll get you invited to any Sunday breakfast on this block." Caleb waved her inside. "I've got something to show you." She followed him to the kitchen where the shoebox sat on the table. The lid had been set aside, and inside were letters, photos, a locket, a dried flower pressed into an old notebook. Juliana sat, slowly, almost reverently. "Is this your mom?" Caleb nodded, pulling out a photo of a smiling woman with wild curls and laughing eyes. "She was like you. A boss lady. She had her own hair salon." Micah added from the doorway, arms crossed, but voice gentler than usual. "Ran it with more heart than hustle." Caleb picked up a folded piece of paper, yellowed and creased. "This one's for Dad. I found it in her desk a few years ago. He never opened it." Micah's eyes shot toward the letter. His breath caught. "Caleb." "It's time," the boy said simply. Then he looked at Juliana. "You read it." Micah started to object, but Juliana had already reached for the letter, unfolding it with slow fingers. Her voice was calm, measured but tender. "Micah, if you're reading this, I guess I've gone home ahead of you. I need you to know, I never doubted the way you loved me. You were more than I ever hoped for. And you gave me a life full of grace, even when we had so little. But now I need you to do one more thing for me. Live, don't let grief be the house you live in. Let it be the wind that reminds you of where we've been, not what's left. Love again. Laugh again. Let Caleb see that joy doesn't die with someone. It grows when you let it in. I'll be around in the way he smiles, in the way you fix things, in every act of kindness you think goes unseen. I see you always, Sarah. Juliana paused at the end, eyes misted, but voice steady. The room was silent except for the ticking of a wall clock and the soft whir of the ceiling fan. Micah sat down slowly, hands folded, shoulders stiff. I didn't think I was ready. Caleb reached for his hand. You are now. For a long moment, no one said anything. Then, Juliana carefully refolded the letter and placed it back in the box. She sounds like someone I would have liked, she said softly. Micah smiled through glassy eyes. She would have liked you too, especially the part where you brought bacon. Juliana laughed gently, and the sound cracked something open in all three of them. Not in a dramatic way, but like light finding a crack in old stone. Later that afternoon, the three of them sat on the front steps, watching neighbors pass by with dogs and strollers. Juliana handed Caleb a grilled cheese she'd made in the cast-iron skillet. You're officially the best billionaire I've ever met, Caleb said between bites. Juliana smirked. You meet a lot of billionaires. Only the ones who bring bacon and make grilled cheese. Micah shook his head, amused. Kid's got a high bar. Juliana turned toward Micah. I meant what I said earlier, about Sarah, about the letter. That took courage. He nodded, then looked out toward the horizon. There's something about you. You don't push, but you don't walk away either. Maybe because I know how it feels when people do both. He looked at her again, and this time he didn't look away. I'm still wearing the ring, he said, I noticed, but for the first time in years, I'm thinking about what it would mean to take it off. Not to forget, but to let someone else in. Juliana didn't reply right away. She didn't need to, because in that moment, quiet, real, and sun-drenched, nothing needed to be said. They were already becoming something more than who they had been, and for the first time in a long time, neither of them was afraid of it. The sun had already dipped low by the time the last folding chair was packed away, and the lemonade jugs were emptied. The neighborhood cleanup had been a surprisingly joyful affair, more laughter than labor, more community than chore. Juliana hadn't planned to stay that long, but when Caleb handed her a pair of gloves at 9 a.m. and announced, "Today, you're on team graffiti removal," she hadn't argued. By late afternoon, she was sweating, smiling, and had paint on her cheek. Micah had kept his distance for most of the day, not cold, but cautious. He seemed to be watching her from the edges, as if testing whether this version of her sleeves rolled. Hair frizzed, hands dirty was real. And she was. When the last bag of trash was carried off and the final "thank you" had been shared, someone turned on a portable speaker, jazz old school Ella Fitzgerald, crackly and rich. The sun had melted into a copper horizon when the first couple started slow dancing near the grill. Juliana smiled. Do people just start dancing at random here? Micah leaned against the trunk of a maple tree, arms folded. Only when they feel like they've earned it. He was quiet for a moment, then stepped toward her. Dance with me. Juliana blinked. You're not serious. Micah extended a hand, eyes steady. Dead serious. She laughed, nervous, almost reflexive. I haven't danced without a dress code in 20 years. No code here, he said softly. Just feet and heart. She stared at his outstretched hand, then slowly placed hers in it. And just like that, they were in the middle of the patchy grass, surrounded by neighbors who pretended not to watch, but absolutely did. The music wrapped around them like silk. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a man who had once known this rhythm and was only now remembering it. You know, she said this would be wildly inappropriate in most of my circles. He smiled. Then it's a good thing we're not in your circles. They swayed small steps, no performance. It wasn't a dance of fireworks or declarations. It was a conversation without words, a prayer with breath. For a brief moment, Juliana leaned her head gently against his shoulder, and Micah didn't flinch. Later, they sat on the tailgate of an old pickup truck, parked by the curb, sipping sweet tea out of mason jars. Caleb was off chasing fireflies with a group of kids, his laughter ringing across the grass like bells. "I haven't danced in 8 years," Micah said quietly. She looked at him. "Since Sarah." He nodded. "She made me promise I would, that one day I'd dance again, that when I could move to music without her voice in my head, I'd know I was ready. And are you?" He looked at her eyes, soft and open in a way she hadn't seen before. "I don't know, but for the first time it didn't hurt. Not in the way it used to." Juliana exhaled, slow and steady. "You know, I was engaged once." He turned to her, surprised. He was a lawyer. Brilliant, handsome, strategic. We scheduled date nights like court appearances. When he proposed, it was on the 32nd floor of a glass building, with a team of photographers waiting. I said yes, because I thought that's what love was supposed to look like. What happened? He handed me a prenup before I'd even picked a dress. Micah winced. I didn't walk away because of the document. She said I walked away because I realized I had built a life where nothing was vulnerable, everything was protected, curated, insured, even love. And now she looked across the street where Caleb had stopped to help a younger girl tie her shoe. Now, I think maybe real love isn't about protection. Maybe it's about letting someone close enough to see your unedited life. Micah took a long sip of his tea, then said, "You saw me." She turned to him. In the rain, he continued. "You saw the ring, the wall, the grief, and you didn't flinch. You didn't try to fix it. You just stood there. That mattered." She smiled softly. "You saw me too. Not the company, not the car, just me." They sat like that, watching the night grow around them, not needing to fill the silence. Then Micah did something unexpected. He took off the ring. Not ceremoniously, not dramatically, just quietly, like someone finally setting down a stone they'd carried too long. He held it in his palm for a long moment, before tucking it gently into his pocket. Juliana said nothing, but her eyes filled, and she reached for his hand. And this time he didn't pull away. The night was warm, with the kind of quiet only small neighborhoods knew how to hold. Juliana lingered on the porch swing, the sound of cicadas blending softly with Caleb's laughter in the front yard. The boy had a mason jar in one hand and hope in the other, chasing fireflies barefoot, like it was his job. She couldn't remember the last time she saw a child play without a screen glowing in front of him, or a grown man sit quietly beside her without needing to fill the space with small talk. Micah sat nearby, one arm resting on the porch rail, the other cradling a cold root beer. He looked more relaxed than she'd ever seen him, less like a man bracing against life, and more like one easing into it. "You ever catch one?" she asked, watching Caleb zigzag through the grass. "A firefly." "Yeah," Micah smiled faintly. "All the time, but Sarah wouldn't let us keep them in jars. Said some magic only works when it's free." Juliana glanced at him. Sounds like something she'd say. Micah nodded. She believed in light, even in people who didn't know they had it. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that felt earned. Then Caleb came bounding up the steps, flushed and triumphant. "I got 4, he announced, holding up the glowing jar. "But I'll let them go." "Mom's rule." He sat cross-legged between them and began unscrewing the lid with a reverence that made Juliana's throat tighten. One by one, the tiny lights blinked and rose into the dusk until the jar was empty, and the sky felt a little fuller. "Can I make a promise?" Caleb asked suddenly. Juliana turned toward him. Of course, he looked at her, with eyes too wise for his age. "If you keep coming back, I promise, I'll always save you the first firefly of the summer." She swallowed. The night the child. The quiet offer, it struck something deep. Not dramatic, just real. "I'd like that," she said. Micah reached over and tousled Caleb's hair. "Bedtime, buddy." Caleb groaned. "5 more minutes." 3, Micah countered. The boy grinned and scampered off the porch, leaving them alone again with the rhythm of the crickets. "He's opened up to you," Micah said quietly. Juliana looked out toward the yard where Caleb now lay on the grass watching stars. "Kids don't need much, just consistency and truth." Micah studied her for a long moment. "You've given him both." She didn't answer right away. "Then I didn't have that growing up. My father left when I was 9. My mother worked 2 jobs and taught me that independence was the only armor that didn't rust. That's a lonely kind of strength, it is," she admitted, and I wore it proudly. For decades, Micah reached for the now empty jar and set it between them. "But you're not wearing it tonight." Juliana turned to him. "No heels, no script, no armor," he said gently. "Just you." A flicker of vulnerability danced across her features. "And is that enough?" "It's everything." The words settled between them, warm and simple. Micah looked out at the boy in the yard, now tracing constellations with his finger. "He misses her most at night." Glenna's voice was soft. "Do you?" Micah didn't answer right away. Then quietly, every day. "But there are moments now, brief, small, where the ache gives way to something else." "What kind of moments?" He looked at her again, unblinking. "Like this, a breeze swept across the porch. The chimes near the window clinked gently. Juliana reached for her sweater, but found Micah offering his jacket instead. "You'll need it more than I do," he said. She hesitated, then took it. And as she pulled it over her shoulders, she felt something strange and wonderful. Warmth that wasn't hers, but wasn't foreign either, like being welcomed into something quietly sacred. They sat that way until Caleb fell asleep under the stars. Micah stood and scooped him up with the ease of a father used to carrying the weight of everything. He turned toward Juliana. "Stay." She looked up. "Just for a little while," he added. "You don't have to talk, just be here." She nodded. "I'd like that." Inside, she followed him to the living room where a faded couch and a stack of old books waited. He laid Caleb down, gently covering him with a patchwork quilt. Then he returned to her. "Do you want tea?" he asked. "Only if it's the kind that's mostly honey." She smiled. He disappeared into the kitchen. She sat on the couch and noticed the detail she hadn't seen before. A framed drawing of Caleb's first solar car, a wedding photo in black and white, and on the far shelf, a tiny carved figure of an angel holding a wrench. She stood to look closer. Micah returned with 2 mugs and saw what she was holding. "Sarah." "Made that for me," he said. "I fix machines the way she fixed hearts." Juliana smiled, touched. "You still do." They sipped tea in silence, the kind of silence that felt like trust. Eventually, Micah spoke again. "You know what scares me most?" She looked at him, waiting. "That if I let someone in again, I'll lose them too." Juliana nodded slowly. "That's what loving someone is, risking the storm for the chance of sunlight." Micah's eyes didn't leave hers. "I'm tired of storms." She reached over, gently took his hand. "Then maybe it's time we make our own light." And for the first time since Sarah died, Micah didn't feel like he was betraying her by wanting joy again. He felt like he was honoring her by finally choosing it. The morning came wrapped in golden silence. Juliana stirred awake on the couch, the soft quilt still draped over her shoulders. She didn't remember falling asleep, just Micah handing her a second cup of honey-laced tea. His voice low as they sat and watched the stars outside the window until words were no longer needed. She looked around the room, still dim with early light. The bookshelf was cluttered. The table held a ceramic mug with a crack running through it. The rug had a corner folded under. And yet something about it all made her chest tighten in the best way. This place felt lived in, loved, and she rose, folded the quilt carefully, and walked toward the kitchen where the faint sound of bacon sizzling met her. Micah looked up from the stove, his hair messy, his eyes warm. Morning, morning, she echoed, surprised at how natural the word felt. Hope you're okay with eggs. Caleb insists they're not edible unless they're scrambled with cheese. She chuckled. Sounds like a boy who knows what he wants. He handed her a mug of fresh coffee, black, no sugar. She sipped it and smiled. You remembered I noticed things. They moved through the kitchen like two people who'd been doing this forever, even though it was only their first morning. Like this, there were no awkward pauses, no scrambling for what to say. Just quiet, mutual presence. A few minutes later, Caleb stumbled in hair wild, dragging his blanket like a cape. When he saw her, he stopped. You're still here, he said. I am cool. He plopped into his usual chair and looked up at her seriously. Do you like waffles? I do. Good. You can stay longer. Micah raised a brow. Is that an official invitation? Caleb shrugged. She passed the bacon test. She's good. Juliana laughed, but there was something in her eyes, an emotion she couldn't name, maybe because she'd never felt it. Not like this. Micah slid eggs onto plates, poured orange juice, and they sat down together. The three of them, like they'd always done it. After breakfast, Caleb disappeared into the garage to work on his next invention, a solar-powered smoothie bike, leaving Micah and Juliana alone on the porch, with 2 fresh mugs and a quiet that pulsed with unspoken things. Micah was the first to break it. I haven't told you everything about Sarah. Juliana turned toward him gently. You don't have to. I want to. He set his mug down, folded his hands in his lap. Near the end, he began, when we knew time was short. She asked me what scared me most. I told her I was afraid I'd become invisible after she was gone, that without her, no one would really see me. Just the man who lost his wife. Just the mechanic. Just a dad. He looked up at Juliana, eyes steady. But the first night I saw you under that broken hood trying not to swear at a flat tire, I felt something shift. You didn't look through me. You didn't try to fix me. You saw me, and that scared me even more. Juliana didn't flinch. I know what that fear feels like. I've lived inside it most of my life. She placed her hand over his. But I'm still here. Micah nodded slowly. I know. A bird landed on the porch, railing chirped once, and took off again. The breeze carried the smell of cut grass and something baking down the street. Time slowed, softened. Then Juliana's phone buzzed. She ignored it. Micah glanced at the pocket of her blazer. Important. Not today. He smiled more to himself than to her. After a while, she stood, paced the edge of the porch, then turned. There's something I've been thinking about, she said. Something big. Micah braced himself, though he didn't know why. I've been searching for land, she said, to build a retreat center, for people grieving, for foster kids, for single parents, a place where healing isn't a theory, it's built into the ground. Micah stared at her eyes, slowly widening. I want to fund it, she continued, but I don't want it to be another project. I want it to be a life, something I can feel with my hands. She paused. I want to build it here. Micah blinked. Here, like, in this town. She nodded. I don't want to live above the clouds anymore. I want something real. I want sun-warmed porches and creaky floors and neighbors who dance without music. Micah looked at her, really looked, and saw not a billionaire, not a polished executive. He saw a woman standing barefoot on a porch, asking for roots instead of applause. You sure? He asked. Juliana stepped closer. No, but I've never been more willing to find out. He stood closed the distance and took her hand. You won't do it alone, he said, and something in her, something fragile and long locked away, breathed for the first time in years. She didn't cry, but if she had, it wouldn't have been from sadness. It would have been from the strange, beautiful ache of arriving finally, somewhere that felt like home. The next few weeks passed, not in a blur, but in the kind of slow, deliberate rhythm Juliana had never known she needed. Mornings started with porch coffee and Caleb's wild inventions clattering in the garage. Afternoons rolled into neighborhood errands, shared lunches and laughter that echoed through backyards. Juliana's sleek Mercedes stayed parked more often than not, replaced by dusty sneakers, grocery bags with bruised apples, and pockets full of ordinary joy. One Thursday morning, Micah handed her a set of work gloves and said, "You're officially on the shed rebuild team." "Are there benefits?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Just one," he replied, splinters and a side of humility. They worked side by side beneath the late summer sun, tearing out rotten boards and laying down fresh pine. Her hair stuck to her neck, her nails chipped, her shoulders ached, and she'd never felt more alive. By the end of the day, Juliana sat on an overturned bucket sipping lemonade and wiping sweat from her brow. Micah handed her a sandwich, the bread slightly crushed from being in his tool bag. "You know what I admire about you?" he asked. She raised an eyebrow, playful. "That I can swing a hammer in heels." "No," he said with a smile. "That you didn't have to stay." "But you did." She looked out across the lawn where Caleb was setting up a lemonade stand with 2 neighborhood kids and a hand-painted sign that read, "Pay what feels right, I think." I was waiting my whole life to be needed, in a way that didn't depend on what I could offer, she said. Micah was quiet for a moment, then set down his drink. "There's something I need to show you." He led her inside to a room she hadn't yet been in. It was simple. A converted space that once may have been a second bedroom, now lined with carefully stacked boxes and a battered guitar in the corner. He reached into the closet and pulled out a narrow velvet-covered case. Opening it revealed a photo album, old worn corners fraying. He flipped through the pages slowly. "This was our honeymoon," he said, pointing to a grainy photo of him and Sarah on a beach. "We had $32 left after gas, and snacks, slept in the truck." She said it was the best night of her life. He turned a few more pages, birthdays, a hospital room with baby. Caleb swaddled in his arms, a Christmas tree made out of stacked books when money was tight. "These are the things no one Googles," he said. "The quiet chapters, the ones that taught me what love really is." Juliana's hand touched a photo of Micah holding Sarah's hand in what was clearly a hospital gown. Her eyes were tired, but radiant. "She looks like she knew," Juliana whispered. "She did," he said. "And she made me promise not to spend the rest of my life just surviving her loss." He closed the book and looked at Juliana. "I think she'd be okay with this. With us." Juliana didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, "Micah, I've never asked for permanence. I don't even know what it looks like. But whatever this is, we don't have to name it. I just want to keep showing up for it." Micah smiled. Slow. Real. "Then let's keep showing up. That Saturday, the neighborhood held a block party in Juliana's honor, not because she funded a new community center, though she did, or because she brought in legal aid for struggling tenants, also true, but because she had simply become one of them. There were lawn chairs, borrowed, speakers, grilled corn, and kids with sticky faces. No one cared about net worth or public image. They cared about who helped carry tables, who remembered birthdays, who brought pie. Juliana brought 3. Caleb ran up mid-party, his cheeks flushed. "We made you something." He pulled her by the hand to the center of the street, where a small wooden sign stood planted in the grass, the lighthouse, where people heal. Below it in childlike paint strokes were the names Juliana, Micah, Caleb. Tears came before she could stop them. Micah stepped beside her quietly, proud. "We figured if you're going to build a place for healing, it should start with the people who believe in it most." Juliana knelt, ran her hand gently across the sign and looked up at them. These 2 hearts, who had become her whole map. She stood slowly, and in front of neighbors, friends, and fireflies, just beginning to emerge from dusk. She leaned in and kissed Micah. Not dramatically, not with a flourish, just honestly. The kind of kiss that says, "I'm here. I've been waiting, and I'm not going anywhere." Micah's hand found hers, and somewhere not so far away the wind settled down for the first time in years. It was a Sunday morning in late September when Micah opened the drawer, not just any drawer, that drawer, the one in the hallway he hadn't touched in years. Inside were old keys, forgotten tools, birthday cards, and a velvet box that had gathered more dust than anything else. He held it for a long time before opening it. The wedding ring still gleamed, though time had softened its shine. He turned it over in his fingers, the inscription barely visible now. "Still always." He smiled, not in sadness, but in peace. Then gently he closed the box and placed it back, but this time not in the drawer. He carried it to the shelf by the window, the one with Sarah's angel figurine holding a wrench. He set the ring beside it like a quiet offering, a thank you. Then he stepped outside, where the wind had turned crisp and the sky shimmered with early autumn. Juliana was sitting on the porch, swing legs tucked under her, cradling a cup of tea. She looked up. "You were gone a while." "Had to put something in its place," Micah said, sliding beside her. He didn't say what. He didn't need to. She reached for his hand. It was warm, familiar. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the retreat center, about the land out near Maple Grove." Micah nodded. "The one with the orchard?" "Yeah. The barn's falling apart. The roof leaks. But it's got bones. Good bones. So do most good things," he said. They sat in quiet agreement. From inside the house, the sound of Caleb's voice floated out something about solar panels and goat rentals. He'd apparently decided the retreat should include therapy animals and a juice bar Juliana had promised to consider. Both, Micah chuckled. "He's already planning the groundbreaking ceremony." "Of course he is," Juliana said. "He thinks this whole town revolves around him." "Well," Micah said, "he's not wrong." They sipped their tea as the sun climbed higher. The porch creaked beneath them. Across the street, Miss Darlene was watering her geraniums in fuzzy slippers. Somewhere, a dog barked without purpose. Everything was so ordinary. And that, Juliana thought, was the miracle. Not the fireworks, not the big reveal, but this quiet, consistent choosing. Day after day, Micah leaned back. "You know what? I used to think. Love was. What a feeling. Fireworks, gravity, all the big cinematic stuff. Then I lost Sarah, and I thought love was just what grief leaves behind." He paused, looked at her. "But now I think love is something else. It's showing up. It's fixing the broken window, making coffee the way someone likes it. being the hand someone reaches for without hesitation. Juliana didn't reply. She just leaned over, rested her head on his shoulder, and the world stilled. That evening, as dusk folded over the sky like a blanket, they walked down the gravel path behind the garage. Caleb had insisted they see what he'd made. "It's not perfect," he warned, "but it's close." He led them to a tiny wooden sign nailed into the edge of the fence. The lighthouse. Coming spring 2026. Below in smaller letters, where broken things get fixed, especially hearts. Juliana knelt to trace the letters. "Did you come up with that?" she asked Caleb. He shrugged. "Micah says I'm dramatic." Micah grinned. I said, "Imaginative." Juliana stood and placed a kiss on Caleb's forehead. "I think you're both." They walked back slowly, the three of them. No need to rush, no need to define what they were or what they would be. Some things don't need names to be real. That night after Caleb had gone to bed, and the house was dim, except for a single lamp in the living room, Juliana stood at the kitchen sink, drying the last plate. Micah approached her from behind, arms gentle around her waist. "You tired?" he asked. "A little," she replied. "But the good kind." He pressed a kiss to her shoulder. "I'm glad you stayed." She turned to him. "I didn't just stay," she said softly. "I came home, and Micah, the man who had once believed his heart would never hold joy again, simply pulled her in and whispered the only words that mattered. So did I." And somewhere in a drawer not too far away, a wedding ring lay in peace. Not as a symbol of something lost, but as a blessing passed on. A quiet ending and a new beginning. We'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one, and it truly warms our hearts to see how far these stories travel. If this story touched you in any way, please consider subscribing to Soul Moments. Story. Your support helps us keep sharing these quiet, powerful tales of love, hope, and healing from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you for watching and for being part of this beautiful, growing community. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other.